during and after the war. V12 engine, pumping out about 1,600 horsepower. And when legendary air show and warbird pilot Vlado Lenek passes in front of you, he could be going through as much as 120 gallons an hour being burned in that aircraft. Watch and listen.
As we see Vlado Lenek go in that Mustang, let me tell you a little bit about how this all started. Back in World War II, prior to the time the United States became part of the war, when we were still a neutral country, we were still supplying some warplanes to the Royal Air Force and other allied nations. One of those airplanes was the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk. They called it the Kitty Hawk in the Royal Air Force. Curtiss could not provide enough Kitty Hawks for the Royal Air Force to go alongside the Royal Air Force Supermarine Spitfires and the Hawker Hurricanes. And the Royal Air Force was also using some North American Texan airplanes as trainers. They called it the Harvard. We called it the AT-6 or the SNJ. And the folks from the British Purchasing Commission in October of 1940 went to the president of North American Aviation because he liked the way North American built their Harvard trainers. And his name was Dutch Kindleberger. And the British folks said to Dutch, we want you to build some Curtiss P-40 Warhawks under license, which meant that they would take the production lines, the plans, the tooling, and build somebody else's airplane in their own factories. Let's listen. So when Dutch Kindleberger heard this request, Dutch Kindleberger said,
"You can't pull a rabbit out of a hat unless you first have the rabbit in the hat."
And Dutch Kindleberger said, we're gonna build our own airplanes. And he said, give us 120 days. That was the most incredibly bold statement anybody could have ever made. But the rabbit,
he was ready. All right, Vlado now, Vlado Lenek, executing the right side of a Cuban 8. I'm going to tell you pilots out there, if you care, his power setting is approximately 42 inches of manifold pressure and about 2,500 RPM. Each pilot uses a little bit different. His entry speed into these three-quarter looping maneuvers is about 260 to 280 knots. Now, off the top of this loop, he'll find himself upside down. He'll start down on the 45-degree line. Right about in here, he'll roll the aircraft to the right side up position. And it is a figure 8 with the figure 8 laying on its side, or the horizontal 8 as they call it. Vlado flying the P-51 as smooth as possible. Other great features of the aircraft was the fact that the radiator that you might see at the bottom of the fuselage, just after the trailing edge of the wing, wasn't a drag item, but it was actually providing thrust for the aircraft. Vlado doing a reverse Cuban 8 now, capping off on top, reversing direction and diving back down. This is probably going to be inside our Barnstormer's loop. And again, he's probably holding that power right even without changing it, watching his entry speed, and he'll probably look for 260 to 280 once again. This should be the looping maneuver. You'll see how large it is, and he'll be pulling probably only about 3 Gs. You'll notice how much altitude the airplane gains. And again, the sound of that Rolls-Royce Merlin engine is absolutely magic. Right about in here, he's pumping, about 60 gallons an hour through that engine. Yeah, that was the Vlado Lenek perfect inside, very large loop. Give Vlado a big round of applause, if you will. That guy can fly airplanes. And one of the nicest guys you ever want to meet as well. He's pretty cool. He used to fly a P-51 called Moonbeam McSwine. He sold it, and then his phone rang off the hook. Come and fly our airplanes. And he said, I've been busier than I ever was on my own airplane flying other people's aircraft. Now again, a reverse Cuban 8, and Rob's got more for you.
All right, now when Dutch Kindleberger told the British Purchasing Commission, you know, give us 120 days, we'll build you a brand new airplane, he had the rabbit to pull out of a hat, and that was something, a wing design, part of which was gained from German technology from a visit that he and his designers, Ray Rice, Lee Atwood, and Edgar Schmood had to German territory, a wing design called laminar flow, and this is what we see. This was the result. The 117 days after he made that comment, the Mustang was born, but it had an Allison V12 engine in it, not quite capable of keeping up at altitude with the Hurricanes and Spitfires. So the British said, let's try something different.
And they put in their Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, which had a 2-speed supercharger and was so effective in their Supermarine Spitfire and their Hawker Hurricane, crop duster Vlado Lenik. At any rate, yeah, we can have fun. And they said, well, we'll apply that because it did so well in the Battle of Britain. And once the engine was mated up, the airframe and the wings, the laminar flow wings, could really do their job. And that radiator, going back to that story, it actually provided jet thrust rather than drag, a big item hanging beneath the fuselage out in the wind. Was not a drag item, but it produced 300 pounds of jet thrust through heating the air and then pushing it out a very small hole in back, and that's pretty much a jet engine.
They called it the Meredith effect, believe it or not. You know, Danny, there is, as he does the 8-point hesitation roll, stopping it at 45 degrees, there was a comment that was made about this particular airplane in the United States Senate, as I recall, and I think what was said has been borne out because a lot of people think this is the best fighter that's ever been built.
And we respect any fighter that any of our veterans ever flew, no matter what it was. If it brought them home safely, Rob, they used to say, my favorite airplane is the one that brought... I want you to hear that victory roll by Vlado Lenik, reminiscent of pilots coming back to their home base. Chuck Yeager's wartime P-51, the glamorous Glenn #3, his third aircraft named after his wife Glennis,